episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hi, and apparently we're getting close to vacation time because Ken can't talk. So, yeah, just get over it, right? We're really excited to have everyone back this week. We've got Guy from Sneak, and we'll jump into that shortly. There's just a couple of announcements. Ken and I will be at DevSecOps Days in Austin in a couple weeks, right? And then I will actually also be at CactusCon the end of next week. Actually not speaking. I'm just going to be there. So if people are around, let me know. I'd love to, see podcast listeners or whatever, right? Just talk as general. There was one other announcement. The hands-on code review workshop got picked up for B-Side San Francisco. That's going to be a little different than the course that Ken and I have been teaching. That's the full secure code review methodology course. This is going to be more, hey, everybody bring an open source project and let's use the methodology on it. So it should be an interesting experiment in finding bugs in open source applications. I think that's everything I've got on my list. Ken, is there other stuff that you wanted to review before we get into Sneak and Guy and all things vulnerability finding, I guess?
No, just that if anybody has anything they want us to specifically cover live at DevSecOps Days. Man, I really can't speak today. I think that's December 16th. If there's anything you want us to cover live at that event, just let us know. If you have any questions you want us to ask the organizers or any of the speakers, just hit us up at absoluteappsec@gmail.com. Again, that's absoluteappsec@gmail.com. That's it.
Cool. Yeah, I know we've got to kind of put together. We got 45 minutes there in the middle of the day, so it should be an interesting experiment on trying to run something live in the middle of a conference and streaming at the same time. So please bear with us, I guess, is all that we can say there. So.
Yeah, pretty much. So I guess with that, I'll introduce Guy. And please tell me if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, but as you've seen, I can't speak it anyway. So is it Guy Podjarny?
Guy Podjarny, yeah. Or I go by Guy Po as well. It's kind of easier to pronounce.
Okay. Yeah. No, so thank you for joining us on the show. If you don't know Guy is the founder of Sneak, and he wrote I think it's an O'Reilly book on securing open source applications, and it went in depth on how you deal with specifically pulling in packages into your applications, and how the different challenges of securing libraries that are maybe included in 3 or 4 different ways, meaning it's a subdependency of another dependency, and how do you alert on that, and all kinds of in-depth granular information on package open source, securing open source libraries essentially. He's also spoken at a lot of conferences. I think you're all over YouTube. I've seen a ton of your interviews on YouTube. So Guy is super familiar with we're going to talk about his background. Super familiar with open source security, or really involved in it. So again, thanks for joining us, Guy. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
So I was gonna start sort of asking about your background, because you have a really interesting background. You started you can probably talk about it, but I did see that you started off, or at least you were working in IDF intelligence, which I thought was fascinating. First of all, I know later you became you basically were the chief architect at Watchfire, which looks like it was acquired by IBM.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And so you actually were part of the product management for AppScan, which again is another fascinating area. So let's just start there, a little bit about your background and these really interesting things that because we've talked about AppScan a bunch on this podcast. So positive and negative. the good and the bad. So
yeah, there's a pros and cons. Sure. So I can kind of do the rundown. So yeah, I kind of started, beyond, the occasional hacking, recreational, in high school. I started in the sort of the cyber parts of the Israeli army, and spent about 4.5 years in the army, which is in Israel. In IDF, yeah, sort of not the Israeli. In Israel, the IDF kind of serves a whole bunch of purposes beyond, from a career perspective. Above and beyond, of course, it's sort of a defense function, which is, one is curation, so it sort of figures out, it finds people that are very well suited to the job at hand, and specifically that's true for the cyber parts as well, and just sort of curates, like imagine an employer that has all these 16-year-olds in the country, at their disposal, filter for a couple of years, and sort of find the people that they think are best suited, and then you have to sign up for a year and a half. So there is a voluntary element above and beyond the 3-year mandatory service. So it kind of works as a filter, and then like educational entity, because you go into these like intense. I don't know if this was discussed in the show. I'm sure you've had some alumni over here, but there's this 6-month course where you study from 8 a.m. to midnight for 6 months, and it's a pretty intense course with sort of a lot of smart people around. So built those out, and then when you come out of the army, it acts as a kind of like the Ivy Leagues in the US. It acts as a kind of as a network, right? Because you get out of the army, but then a couple of these other folks that worked with you for a couple of years in the army, they got out a couple of years before you, right? So they work at some company and they want to pull you in. So it sort of creates this network. So I got out of the army into one of the early sort of AppSec players, Sanctum, actually before Watchfire. So Sanctum really where AppScan was created, and I got pulled in. It had a good number of sort of people that worked that came from where I was, and got pulled in. And didn't quite know AppSec kind of at the time, and that was my first quanter. And funny enough, like AppScan, you talk about it. I don't know if it was shared, but AppScan was actually a sales tool. Really, what we built was AppShield. We built the first web app firewall, and we're trying to convince people that they should care, right? That SQL injection is a thing, that they have it. And so we built this like a 2-part system. AppScan was originally these 2 Linux system connectors, an importer and exporter. It was complicated. That was really a sales tool. It was to basically go through, and there was this like a semi-gray area sales methodology that we had there, which is, hey, I'll give you a free audit if you give me like a C-level sort of meeting after, and then you'd find problems, and you'd sort of engage in the. So, anyways, long story short, as time evolves, people said, well, like this web app firewall thing, it's complicated and all that. PCI kind of revived it later. But this AppScan thing, like this automated scanner thing, that's pretty cool. Can I buy that? And it evolved from there. So I helped. I kind of came in to work on AppShield at first, and then kind of went on to work on AppScan. And then I moved to Canada. Watchfire acquired Sanctum, so I moved from Israel to Ottawa, Canada, which I couldn't place on a map really at the time, and worked on AppScan, created AppScan Enterprise, which is sort of an enterprise flavor of it, and started working on a static analysis engine, AppScan Developer Edition, which we called it at the time, and then IBM acquired us. So continued working on AppScan Developer Edition within IBM, and I was the product manager for. Like first I wasn't the developer, but at some point I took on being the product manager of AppScan and AppScan Enterprise and later AppScan Developer Edition. Then we bought Ounce Labs, so we built AppScan, like it got renamed AppScan Source, and that's the product out there today. So sort of had this like 9-ish years journey in early days of AppSec, and it was really interesting. It was fascinating. I've got like a dozen patents in static analysis. I kind of went deep into this space. We did like it was white box and black box and glass box testing versus like SAST, IST, type of terminology, partner terms today. And we built those out, and really, like I would say, we succeeded financially with from by selling to security individuals. But where we didn't succeed is we had this sort of premise or this aspiration even back then to get developers to embrace security. It was called I ran AppScan Developer Edition. It had developer in the name, right? It was sort of it ran in Eclipse and it touched source code. Surely it must be a developer product. Except it wasn't. It was an audit product that was happened to be built into a developer environment. We never really had conversations about sort of developer use case quite as much. And that learning kind of came on later when we talk about Sneak. But we did succeed sort of financially, and also like Rational bought us. In IBM it was Rational, the developer tool division that bought us. So that was kind of my AppSec stretch. And then I left security, which is I guess not that common. And I left IBM to found a web performance startup called Blaze, which kind of my thinking at the time, if it's interesting, is it was, I just came from this world of security where like network security was being a little bit commoditized. It's always continues to be complicated, but AppSec was really where the attacks were happening and this new nascent notion. So things were moving, security was moving to the application layer. And I came out with saying, well, where else is this transition from network to application happening? And kind of landed on performance and said, well, like in performance, network performance is important and continues to be important, but really the bottleneck is kind of moving to application performance. So your website, like how you organize your JavaScript and encode your images matters more to your performance than, another sort of 50 milliseconds of latency. And so built a company, kind of coined this term of front-end optimization, FEO, which is ugly in Spanish, which I had an issue with, but anyways, we stuck with it. And Akamai acquired us, and I became CTO for the web business in Akamai, so about half of Akamai for about 3.5 years, and moved with them to London. I'll pause a sec. I don't know if there's any.
No, yeah. Did you move? Sorry, did you say you moved for the Akamai?
I moved from Ottawa to London, UK. So that's where yeah. And this is, I moved to Ottawa for a year. I stayed for 10. Otherwise,
yeah, that's usually how it goes.
I didn't know that, by the way, that AppScan was originally that's fascinating. I had no idea that was originally a sales tool.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's one of those discussions that you end up having inside of a company that you never know really what your customers are going to want. You have an idea, but until you get into it, it becomes let them tell you.
JavaScript kind of killed like App Shield, the web app firewall was created on the premise of this like cookie signature thing that tracks everything on a web page and basically only allows you to perform the actions that were on that web page back. And then JavaScript just sort of killed that vision. There was no opportunity for that to happen. So it took a few years for that sort of realization to sink in. But in the meantime, the AppScan business kind of took off.
You make a good point that I feel like the WAF business has been reinvigorated over the last few years. But yeah, it was pretty much dead for a while. Just pretty much scorned by what's that?
Until section 6.6 in PCI came along.
It seems like that had a large effect on the industry overall, right? We start talking about static analysis tools became huge as well because we can do a WAF or we can do static analysis, right? Those were the two options. So
it was an interesting time, and I think to date, WAFs there's something kind of fundamentally incorrect about the idea that you can take an application and then put an intelligent kind of layer of protection that is outside the application. So like I think there's not to say there isn't value in it, but there's some inherent flaws, with that approach. And the more modern approach of RASP of sort of like protecting those applications from inside, has its own challenges, and it's not without its flaws, but at least it kind of brings it inside the app, which is where it is. So with the WAF, what we've observed over the years, and I think that is still the case as I see it today, is really, it's a nice checkbox item, and you can block the very obvious kind of patterns, but then tuning it to your app is just really, really difficult. And then, so many people buy super fancy technology and then turn on the very minimum basics of it, versus truly maximizing it, and or leave it in like alert mode versus protect mode, and
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I always laugh. I was having a discussion recently with, was that on the podcast about like AWS's WAF, right? And how many times I've seen it implemented, and the only thing it does is detects whether or not the IP address, like the source IP, is coming from Russia and China, and that's it, right? They don't actually enable XSS protections or anything built into the WAF. It's like the bare minimum. Yes, we have WAF. It's a compliance check. Right?
Exactly. That's the box.
If you have a WAF and
Yeah.
if you have a WAF and not a CSP, there's something completely out of whack there. You know?
Yep.
But so I was curious, what was the driving force for you to found Sneak? Like, what was kind of the impetus there for that?
So it's kind of, two versions of it. Like one is just, I kind of got the itch to do another startup. So after about 3.5 years at Akamai, which I really enjoyed, but I was my first decision was to sort of, I'm going to found another thing, and I was going to take AROF, and that didn't happen. I just kind of got sucked into to the middle and said, okay, like I'm founding another startup. And then as I dug through ideas, really for me, Sneak was the combination of my two journeys. In the AppSec world, we wanted to get to developers, and we failed on that front. And again, we succeeded in a bunch of things, but we failed to get to developers. And then what happened in the world of performance is I've been a part of the Velocity programming committee, which is kind of where DevOps came to be, with sort of the original, AllSpa, and then some non-AllSpa, saying, I forget what it was, that they deploy like 10 times a day, and everybody was like, that's an abomination, so irresponsible. Nobody would ever do that. And I think Amazon, when they said they do it 40 times a day. Anyways, I've been a lot of kind of that part, the world of performance that I was in was one of the early ones to be disrupted by this sort of developer tool motion, sort of this DevOps motion, with Gomez and Keynote falling by the wayside in favor of like New Relic and AppDynamics. And so, and even at Akamai, I was competing with Fastly, which like at the time, today I think the stats are different, but like at the time it was like a CDN that was obviously not as fast, not as secure, not as reliable, and yet like people were using it by the droves. It's like, why are you doing that? And it really came down to this notion that it was working the way they wanted to work, like Fastly was just attuned itself to their use case. And so coming up with those two views, my I don't know if it's like realization, or the eureka moment was really on saying, well, we want to get developers to embrace security. We need to build a developer tooling company, not a security tooling company. We need to think about the developer as the most important user of the product. And we need to model after developer tools. Like it needs to look like the other tools developers use. And so really Sneak was that, it was even before we decided what we do, like what is the specific security solution we'll tackle. It was clear that it'll be a developer tooling company in its approach. And then, we picked sort of this notion of open source security, SEA, securing open source libraries as the initial kind of core tenant. We've since expanded to container security, and we'll do more. But really, it was because that was, a specific problem that felt like it was underserved and we needed more capabilities, but also felt like it was one where we had a thesis to how do we build a product that was developer focused. And we've done, like, if I slip a little bit into like the early days, we made a bunch of these decisions that were not the best commercial decisions at the beginning, but were the right ones from a user experience. So like we built a product that was only for Node.js, only for that ecosystem, and that really tuned us. We shipped a crappy little CLI about a month after incorporation. It was beta, nobody was paying for it, but we iterated on it, and we figured out we worked closely with that community. It was a sort of a community we figured was like Heroku and like New Relic. They thrived on Ruby. Ruby was at the time. We felt Node was at the right time. So like small enough to sort of embed in, but big enough to care. And we built this product that was really Node.js, and then we learned, experiencing with the CLI, that people really needed it to be easier to onboard. So we built the GitHub integration, which has like some funky tech behind it that wasn't obvious. Like we're able to build a dependency graph based on like on a package JSON file that we find, we're able to build the dependency graph without building the app. Today, there's log files. A few things have been made a little bit easier, but that was hard. Like mimicking these things is tricky. And we built, the whole company was designed after like, the New Relics of the world and those. And so that was a part of it. And we built this like bottom up, free for open source, very kind of good motion. And I think what happened was we nailed the sort of the developer experience. And then we got to security people and they said, oh, this is awesome. Can you also do this for? And Java, this other Git server, and it took us another year, from the time we nailed the developer experience to the time that we had something that security was truly in a reasonable volume willing to purchase, because they wanted that breadth. But I think if we hadn't taken that path, we would have done what typically happens, which is build a shallow and broad product, because legitimately security teams need governance. Like, it doesn't help you much if I solve this security problem for like 20% of your applications. I need to solve it to some, large percentage of them for it to matter. So there's all this incentive to go broad and not as deep. And I think the decision we made with like a little bit dogmatic, like, no, this is going to be a developer tooling company, not a security company, helped us kind of unlock something, which, fortunately we came out the other side. A lot of dev tools die without monetization abilities, so we came out the side and we're thriving now. So
it's interesting because the developer market is there's a couple of factors, but the developer market is bigger, obviously, than security, because they're AppSec. I mean, try hiring AppSec people. It's clear that there's a shortage, but so that's a big community. But also, if developers are pushing for your product and using your product first, then you definitely have a leg up getting into the security side, because it's like, well, people are already using this, and like, I don't have to convince my developers. It's just they're convincing me. Like, it's they're using it. So that's an interesting approach.
Well, and on that point, Ken, I think about like the app scan, even the source edition, and Fortify and the other static analysis tools, and it's always taken the other approach, like you were saying, right? Like, hey, we're targeting finding security vulnerabilities, and now we're going to shim that into the IDE. And so the developers, it's not within their workflow, and even within like the CI/CD pipelines, the amount of time it takes to run one of those tools just kills any effectiveness from hey, I'm going to release 10, 30, 40 times a day, because if I was running Fortify 30 times a day, it means I'm not going to release until next week, right? That's just, that's the nature of those tools. So it's an interesting approach. Sorry, Ken, I kind of interrupted what you were saying.
No, I mean, that's pretty much, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, like, if developers are using it, then it's less friction from security. But I had one specific question, because in hearing your journey and your multiple sort of entrepreneurial pursuits, one thing that I've been curious about is, and let me just say, in terms of like, take money out of the equation, right? Because like, frankly, you can join up with a company early enough, not have the responsibility of a founder, and do pretty well like that. So, the money thing, it's to me, I know in this, especially in the security space, that's less of a incentive. So the question becomes, what's your incentive to be an entrepreneur, to found multiple companies, to go through that hardship where you're, sometimes super high anxiety levels, you're working to the bone at times, you're constantly out there trying to promote the company, it's a lot. Basically what I'm saying is you can do a lot less work and still have a decent living. So what's the drive for you to do this?
No, it's a good question. It doesn't have, it's almost like this, what mental deficiency do you have, to like my interpretation, it's definitely a decision that comes with weight. It's never been about the money, I think
right.
It wasn't about the money in Blaze, but then, the acquisition with Akamai kind of sorted me out. I don't need to work, and yet not working has never really crossed my mind. Now, part of it is just the way I'm wired. I think money in our world kind of serves as a barometer of success, right? So you sort of aspire to success, and like it or not, kind of in our world a little bit, the sort of the value of your company and the size of your business is an aspect of that. We try not to just over rotate that. We focused on users and successful users of that, and but it's a barometer of success. It's never really been about the money. To me, it's about impact. It's about kind of making your dent in the universe. And so, like I have these conversations, and I've got a couple of kids, and I have, especially my son has been very inquisitive about this bit, and there's always a guilt trip. There's like a, but why do you work so hard? Don't you have kids? Like he even said that to me when I was sort of, I think this is like 4 years ago. So like, when you started the company, did you know it's going to be so hard? He says, yeah, I knew it. So why did you do it? You have kids, So it's all like guilt drive. But to me, it's about self-fulfillment, right? It's about, what is it that you want to do with sort of your time on this planet? And the answer to that is very different for different people. And I have this sort of desire to sort of have greater and greater impact, and so some of that impact is sort of social, and I'd like to like I do what I can over there, right? Donate a fair bit, and I'd like to think that in some sort of post-Nick future, I'll focus my entrepreneurial kind of efforts, not just sort of funds, to something that's more of a social cause or environmental, which has kind of been more of a concern of mine recently. But really, a lot of it is just around about drive. So yeah, I don't think there was like one answer. It was like, that's why I also sort of said my decision initially was to start another startup, and then the space which I'm super passionate about and really care about was the decision of what to do next. And I do. It is also addictive. So it has same like gambling attitudes, like the highs are really high, but the lows are really low. But like after a while, the human brain is sort of wired to forget the lows and remember the highs. And so serial entrepreneurship is a thing. People come back to it because it's almost like you want to get your fix. The successes are really high, and when you're comfortable, you're not getting those buzzes. My mom's a psychologist, and she says she has this Freud quote that says, "There's no growth without pain." I feel that if you're comfortable, you're not growing, right? You're not learning, and I always want to be learning, to be sort of challenging. So, and a bit of a ramble, but this is
I appreciate the nuanced answer to a nuanced question.
And substance.
No, it's not a simple, straightforward answer. Yeah. And like I said, I mean, there's easier ways to make money for sure. So it has to be a bit more intrinsic. And I think you're definitely not a ramble, more of a thoughtful response that covers the various aspects of what goes into a person such as yourself, who is driven to take on those challenges and that responsibility. It's a very difficult thing. Sorry, Seth, did I interrupt you? Again?
No, I was just going to say something similar, right? Like as far as starting up new things and trying to make almost like your mark, right? Like I think that's felt by a lot of people that are like in this path, right? There's definitely easier ways to just go about living, I think, right? I know in general, I mean, Ken and I have both been involved in smaller companies that are more startup-y, and, trying to run my own thing is definitely a different like anxiety level, but also exactly what you're saying. Like there's a lot of pain and growth that goes into it because it's just a hard thing to do in general, but then also it's very rewarding. To help people out and to do all that.
The same coin. Like you can't have it, right? Like you can't be comfortable and yet be, challenged. Like it's a continuum, and you can choose where you want to be on it, And it's not that I like being in the lows, like those moments are a little bit hard. Like I remember at Blaze, at some point we were doing well. This is the web performance company, and we're doing well, and I even was using the joke at the time. Google Analytics kind of Google Analytics disrupted the sort of analytics industry somewhat. And I was sort of joking. So, well, like, unless Google comes out and sort of launches a product that does what we do for free, fine. And then Google goes off and launches a product that does what we do for free, which was sort of Mod PageSpeed, was like an open source project. And you have to remind yourself, it's like, listen, they haven't, it's not that Google pivoted to do what you do, right? They have a couple people, smart people, they did a thing, there's pros and cons and you pivot from it. But I remember those as like dark days, like a few days, you just recover from the shock, for it. But at the same time, you also remember the highs. And at the end of I think it doesn't have to be entrepreneurship. Like, I see my sister, who I adore, is kind of devoting her life pretty much to these social struggles, right? Like, she went to run away she's in Israel, there's a lot of challenge over there. She went to live with her husband in Berlin, and she found herself there with the refugee problem, sort of helping those. She went to backpack in Mexico, and she found herself in the Chiapas with the oppressed farmers there. They're sort of being those, and went to Argentina, and what do you know? She's with the desempleados, the sort of the unemployed communities after the financial crisis, and so like sometimes these sort of drives and this discomfort that you do around making your impact is founders and sort of economical, and sometimes it's just about where is it that you invest your cycles, right? And I kind of look at it and I'd say, all in all, impact on the world, she's probably making more than I am, even if the dollars are more kind to me.
Yeah.
It seems like it's a thing of, just being sort of almost, I don't want to say restless, but yeah, kind of just being, because there's definitely, and there's, hey, everybody lives their life differently. There's definitely people that are really super content to just sort of 9 to 5 it, and they put their energy into whatever other thing, and but maybe not as much growth, and they're happy with that. But there's definitely like you said, it could be anything. It could be anything that you are pushing yourself outside your limits, or limits you previously thought you had, and then
one of the advantages of doing it sort of a second time around, or sort of with some more comfort, is that you get to there's maybe 2 key advantages. One is you have a little bit more rope, so you can add things that are not at the core about how is it that you want the company to look like, or you can kind of aim higher in terms of changes. So like this developer route that we took, I think, is very much a part of it, right? A couple of years in, we had practically no revenue, and if it wasn't for my kind of background and my like people believing in sort of the fact that I can get there because of sort of the track record, I think it would have been hard. But really, it was all around this sort of developer adoption and sort of getting those. And we had great usage, but we didn't have any revenue. And I think it's hard to do that when you're not, you didn't sort of get some credit. So I think that helped us out, so you get a little bit more there. The other example of that would be the the sort of the culture of the company. When I went back to security, I was concerned, right? Because like you go to Velocity and you're like, Velocity is like one of those sort of DevOps conferences and O'Reilly events, and you come back and you're kind of like, everybody's singing Kumbaya and we can make the web better, and sort of, this like energized, the world can be better type motion. Then you come back from Black Hat and you kind of want to curl up in a cry, right? Like there's no, it's a little bit more like nothing is safe, everything is broken, nothing is going to help you on the, and it's not, like I don't say this to the detriment, it's just kind of a little bit the nature of the industry. And so when we set out to build Snyk, like a lot of my focus was on saying, well, I don't want that to be my life, so we want to be builders, not breakers. And it came into all these like manifestations in the company. It's like our severity colors, like on one hand, we wanted to be a builder, not a breaker. We didn't want the design of the websites to be alarming. It wasn't about fear mongering. We wanted to be welcoming. And yet when I tell you have a high severity vulnerability, you need to be a little bit alarmed, like there needs to be like a little bit of like an impetus for, so, every one of these balances, we found this magenta color for our, this kind of with the purple out of the, for Snyk, there's just a bunch of these different like decisions around those trade-offs, and I think that's happening. Like I think the sort of the, whether you call it DevSecOps or whatever, sort of the security embracing into DevOps is also trying to sort of embrace the culture, right? The sort of the builder, the sharing, the blameless. It's hard to do it in security, but I think it's manifesting. And then I would sort of say last, which is like this comment on working hard. Like I work hard. I worked hard at Akamai as well. I worked hard at IBM, and work-life balance is a decision. Like I have a 6:30 to 9 p.m. blocked off on my calendar, and I go back home and I have dinner with my kids. And I'm oftentimes back at the computer at 9, but you manage it, right? And so I know those are all like privileges a little bit of second time around, right? You have a little bit more knowledge of what you want to do and a little bit more rope to choose.
Yeah, and you're armed with certainly more knowledge.
Yeah. Now, so from a Snyk perspective, like, okay, so we've kind of talked about, building the company and the choice between developer focused versus security focused. Let's talk a little bit about the actual like SCA, like the software composition analysis, how you settled on that. Because the first time I ran into Snyk, I think it was again through developers, right? It was a company that was using it, and it was very node focused. But at the time, you were expanding out into other languages, right? And I know like one of the big ones was Go, because it wasn't supported by, the other like dependency check or other like SCA tools that were out there at the time. But talk to me a little bit about that process, right? So why SCA? What was it that you kind of like? What brought you to that versus some of the other vulnerability analysis that you'd done in the past?
Yeah, I think so. Two things. One is SCA fits, because we started with that sort of developer experience, and we thought about a few paths, but I know which of my two things is really the first. They're both important. So, and we felt SCA was just the space that we can build a good developer experience about it, right? You can build very fast scan. It can be wholly accurate, and then we had to build capabilities on top of it that weren't obvious in the industry around giving you the developer experience, and we've evolved those. We built like, for instance, like application context, right? Like most tools will tell you, hey, you're using library C and it's vulnerable, go fish. Go figure out how to get there, right? Well, we will give you an application context, not an artifact context. So we'll tell you you're using A that uses B that uses C, and therefore C is vulnerable, or the automated remediation. There's been a lot of learnings, on building a good a developer experience, right? And we can dig a little bit into that. I think it's an interesting topic. But we felt like SCA is a space that is more disposed, more predisposed to a good developer experience than, say, static analysis. The second bit was what I now know to phrase as the growth of the scope of the app. So when you look at application security, there's kind of the old application security scope, which is what we've kind of grown up in, right? I definitely have, which is you have this like very hefty IT stack, right? You've got your sort of, hardware maybe and some vSphere cloud platform. You've got VMs, you've got network configurations, there's some database, some Oracle databases that some team maintains. And then the app is like the code and the libraries that are sort of on top, right? So the scope of the app is kind of smaller. When you look at the modern app has a whole bunch of this, like I don't have a good name for it, but it's this app-led infrastructure. So a bunch of these things, like the VMs have turned into containers, and now the operating system is in the scope of the app. The database has gone into like this MongoDB thing that you pull into your microservices now, and now it's in the scope of the app, right? The network config, and the service mesh, or just simple sort of Helm charts, and or like how they interact has moved into the scope of the app. So like there's all this like world of functionality that has moved from IT or sort of infrastructure into the app, and with that, the security concerns of that have also moved into the app. So the sphere of AppSec, like this absolute AppSec, is grown. It's just more is app, and therefore more sec is AppSec, and those areas require special attention because they are security problems that not only are they sort of that they need to move to developers, they're also new security problems. So it felt like open source security had that type of property, and then container security, which we tackle today, sits in that as well. And there's more, like we build more capabilities around this sort of dev first security mindset. But this space of the bits of infrastructure that have moved into the app and are now used in abundance by many more people, having tools to secure them is something that people just generally didn't have in place. They might have the OS dependency check, right, or Black Duck, which is very non-developer friendly, and so on. So, we're basically riding both waves, right? And containers has demonstrated that as well, right? We get like massive adoption of container security. It's a combination of it needs to be embraced by dev, so the DevSecOps trend, and the specific security threat that is sort of growing in prevalence.
Yeah, I mean it's a smart place to be for sure, right? Like as far as where the industry has grown with DevOps coming up, it seems like you are very well placed to bridge that gap between developers and what was traditionally IT. So the container one, I'll be interested to see how that grows in the near future, as because I know there's a number of players in there right now as well, right? There's just it seems like everybody wants to build their own container security solution, and they all differ a little bit.
And I think container security is we try to be sort of our guardrails, like our own guardrails, to not be. I like to say that we're at a good place right now with Sneak, and we can do anything, but we can't do everything. Like we have to choose, some lines, and so our guardrails is very much about if a developer is in the loop, it's sort of fair game for us to sort of engage, not all the things that developers touch, but like many of them. But if it's the container security aspect that is like endpoint protection, malware detection, detecting attacks, if the result of a finding goes to the SOC, goes to then that's kind of not our turf. So we might veer a little bit, we might round out some functionality, but our core in container security is about the developer experience, right? It's about saying, that again, that your sort of Docker file sits in a repository, and that patching a container means running a build, and therefore, these things are developer domain, and we need to be in that. We provide the optimal, self-stated a little bit, right? That's the experience, for that aspect of it. So I think container security is a lot of these things. Like I think a lot of security in the modern stack would either go to the platform or go to developers. That's my prediction. They can't be a third party, and security needs to become like AppSec. The security professionals need to become more security SREs. Need to become more DevOps like enablers, service providers, expertise holders for basically app teams, for developers to be able to embed and implement.
Yeah. I can honestly say, so I work at GitHub on the AppSec team, and I actually completely agree with that, because I found more of my role, like we do secure code reviews, and we do your traditional stuff, but definitely been more of the we've been more involved in just like design, implementation, architecture, enabling, like you said, like, okay, you want to do service to service off, here's like some guidelines and some libs we've put together, and become more of like more almost embedded with new features and new apps being put online as a more of a resource that we can make. Developers can ask questions, pull us in on a pull request, and get some input. It's less so like, here, look at this code, come back in 2 weeks, and tell me everything you found. Which again, we still do, but it's I don't know, it's shifting. I feel like it's shifting anyways. Maybe it's just how I feel, I don't know, but I feel like I've spent a lot more time just embedded with different teams.
Which is,
I think that sorry, go ahead, Guy.
I would just say that, like, this is like any change, it's not an overnight change, right? Like there's this like sort of constant tightening circle of like a culture shift, technology, and sort of people embracing it, and sort of the processes around it, right? So like you need to be iterating, so you can't overnight, like, you'd be broken if you shift it over, right? So I think as the pace of development accelerates, as the amazing platforms that are sort of coming out, and open source, and a bunch of these other technologies around help developers move faster and faster, more and more decisions are being made at any moment. And it's a losing battle to think that any entity outside is going to be able to cope. So we have to teach them to fish on one hand, like there has to be that notion of like, culture, and for that you need empathy. So being embedded with a team kind of helps you. It's a core tenet of DevOps, like being embedded in different teams, just build empathy to the difficulties and challenges on the other side. And you need technology, you need to be enablers. And I'm thrilled that GitHub is investing in security. Like I think it's right. I think the world sort of needs to move there. And I think the likelihood of a developer tooling company building security capability, developer love, is just unfortunately, higher than the likelihood of the security company sort of building developer tools the developers love, and the whole industry kind of needs to shift. But our job as vendors, like our job as tools providers, is to make it easy. There's like how much you care, and there's how hard is it, to do the right thing. And every developer, like there's a cynicism that developers don't care about security. It's like, find me a developer that for the same level of effort, can choose to build a product that is secure or a product that is not secure. Like you wouldn't find one that prefers the product that is not secure. It's just how hard is it, right? So we're going to elevate how much you care, but really what we've done at Snyk and what I think we should do as an industry is drop how hard it is. It just needs to be easy. It needs to be easy, and so it has to be. It's a whole motion, of the industry to shift it, and it's not an overnight. Like even like DevOps, we talk about it as like an established thing. It's just so early in its adoption.
Yeah. I was just going to say, Seth, traditional security companies. I mean, to Guy's point, security first tooling vendors have had issues trying to fit into like the new way of how we do things. And so like, for instance, you'll see these companies who had this, who built their tools based off a previous model that just really doesn't exist much anymore. And then they built like plugins for CI/CD or something like that. They're like, oh, yeah. Well, we're DevOps now. We have a plugin for like Jenkins or something, like that. And yeah, developer first companies, I feel like are positioned better to understand that things are, and to your point again, is like, I can honestly say our team's dealt more with infrastructure security than ever before because of infrastructure as code. And we've talked about this before, but I think what it will be interesting to see is like, obviously with cloud and code as infrastructure, where security, like how much, what next will AppSec basically cover, like as we are taking in more responsibilities for more things because of code pushing so much of this, like what'll be the next thing? I mean, obviously serverless has been talked about quite a bit. I don't know, I don't deal a whole lot with serverless, so I'm not sure, what challenges that'll present. I mean, Seth, I don't know what your thoughts are on where maybe things will go, or Guy, where your thoughts are in 2020.
Yeah. You're asking me to predict the future?
Yeah.
We'll let Guy do that. I mean, I definitely, I see more and more serverless, but then I also, like as a consultant, I continually get pulled back into the world of, Java struts, right, from 25 years ago. So I have this cynicism that, yeah, it's great. So I deal with a new company. I deal with, like, we've had people from Netflix and Segment and, GitHub and now Snyk on the podcast, and you guys are pushing into this world. And then I turn around and, the next thing I'm dealing with is something that we solved 20 years ago, but there's still companies that haven't come along. So I think what Guy was saying as far as, hey, it's very context. It's very, very much based on the business context, right? And where they're coming from. And I even see new code that comes out of developers that were trained 20 years ago, and they're like a development organization team that hasn't ever upgraded their processes. So they may be using a new version of Java Spring and Java Spring Boot, but they're using the same development patterns and waterfall methodology that they used 20 years ago, and it still works. It's just that's what the business is paying for. So I have a hard time saying Yeah, it's all going serverless, because I do see serverless, and I don't want to discount that, but that's still not the majority of companies that I deal with. So
Well,
I
and I
don't know,
think
Guy, what about you, right? Like the
Well,
companies that
I
are
think,
signing up.
so what we think is, I think very much, like this to me comes back to that realization from Node.js. It's like, okay, hold on, like you buy, like we built an amazing product for sort of Node.js security, and then security people, smart, super intelligent, doing the right thing, security people said, I can't buy this. I can't buy this until you support a broader piece of my stack, and I might need to buy that other shallow product that at least gives me coverage across it, because it's not practical for me to sort of have, just over here and some big pieces, but not that many. So, I think for Snyk, what we see is that companies buy Snyk for the future, but then they expect us to support the past, and that's kind of our premise. So we have, a CLI and an API. CLI gets, the command line interface gets like $1 million a month. It's very widely used, and it's the Swiss Army knife, and you can use it in any context, and it adjusts those. And then we have opinionated integrations into the likes of, GitHub and Jenkins and Bitbucket and Kubernetes. And for those, we try to embed the best practices inside our methodology and try to make it even easier, right? Because the challenge with the sort of the CLI, the Swiss Army knife, is that more weight goes to you, more weight goes onto, and we find, fundamentally, I think security would remain a little bit of an overlay because of that history, right? Because as an organization, you want to track it. And unlike many other things, it is something that unlike many other dev tools, you can't really, as an organization, only address this problem in like this slice or that slice of the world, right? There's some exceptions to that, like containers. Clearly, you only care about it in the app. Use containers. That's the sort of natural. But when you deal with a threat, you do need it to be broad. You do need it to be kind of across the stack that you use. So I think it's sort of like it's not like monitoring or even monitoring. I think is something that's more sort of app oriented. But even then, you'd have some capabilities. If I sort of look at monitoring as an example, you'd have some capabilities built into every one of those. But then there's value in using a New Relic or a Datadog that is sort of across the board and is deeper, right? Like it's a best of breed within an ecosystem, and it's the breadth across the board. So I think that's what we'll see. We'll see dev tools across the board. GitHub is doing this, GitLab is doing it. Like other tools are sort of introducing Sonar Source, kind of introducing a SaaS capability. We see there will be more security capabilities that come out of existing kind of tools and existing platforms, and then there will be kind of deep breadth solutions for us. And we aim to be that, right? Like we aim to be, we're a security solution. We will thrive just like Datadog has thriving customers that use AWS CloudWatch. We will thriving customers that also use for that sort of slice and for an element of it, whatever GitHub security alerts, right, in those comments. So it's always a little bit finicky when you get into an actual customer and there's a salesperson on both sides, and you have that conversation. But when you take your head a little bit outside of the trenches and you sort of look at the picture, like a market doesn't just transition. There's exceptions. There's like Slack, but generally speaking, like you need an industry to shift, not an individual. And serverless is a bit of that, and or any of these trends, really, that are moving forward.
Yeah, interesting. I don't know. I did want to go back to one thing that you were talking about from the perspective of security needs to make the barrier to entry lower, right, for developers. And this is one point that's come up a couple of times on the podcast. I think Jerry Gamblin, or maybe it was Leaf, that actually brought it up previously, was that if you have a security tool that a developer can't go and just do self-service sign up for, it's never going to happen, right? Like they've got to be able to go try something out without committing thousands and thousands of dollars and hours to using a product, which is one of the things that security products struggle with, right? Like if I want to go buy AppScan Source, I can't just go buy AppScan Source, right? I have to go through like procurement, and I have to get on calls. They have to demo it for me, even though I'm a professional, I'm in the field. And I struggle across the board with static analysis tools because of this fact, right? I can't just go pay a credit card, get a license, and go. It's this whole kind of sales process that we've built around it. And part of me realizes that the security industry or the vendors view these as high value tools, but there's got to be a way to demo something or to do something that doesn't involve. It's just a pet peeve of, I know quite a few developers in the industry, is it's just like, really, I'm going to come use your tool. You make it so hard to even buy it that why am I going to go through this when I can go to someone and give, and self-register, put in a credit card, and then it expands, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is DNA, but there's also two other factors that play in. One is the tools are hard to get going. So on the assumption that you want someone, like, self-serve is not just about making the software accessible. It's around actually changing the product to be easy to get going with without somebody holding your hand. And so many of these tools don't fit that description. So you have to go hand in hand, right? So if you could just download the trial and get going. I haven't checked apps and source for a good while, so I don't want to sort of disavow, but I assume that if you just sort of got going and did next, in many contexts, it wouldn't give you the results that you're looking for. So they want that. And then the second aspect of it is is kind of this audit mindset, right? It's basically, developer tools, Snyk specifically. I don't mind, like, the number of people abusing Snyk right now to do an audit is, high. Like, I hear anecdotal evidence. We really don't track this at all, of people coming along and doing an audit with Snyk. But Snyk's true value is continuous usage. So I don't mind, I don't care. But if my true value, if my offering was around one-off audits, then it's a concern, right? It's this concern that somebody would go up and they would download an eval version every time, and they would sort of run those. And then you find yourself constraining the product in a way that is not actually usable. So, like, why are you giving me this? Like, I'm not going to have a good experience. So what have you done? And there's this sort of vicious loop that goes on that just sort of gets you to the point where you don't do it. So I'm not really justifying, but I'm just saying that there's more to it than the vendor, than, whatever HCL now sort of deciding to just open up and say, hey, you can download AppSec source without talking to anybody.
Yeah. Which I mean, I can understand that. And actually the second point that you made there is pretty interesting, like what the revenue source is for that tool. It probably drives a lot of it. Because I mean, it would be easy to go download something. You see that with community editions as well. Nessus and some of those other tools that people go down and they use those, and so it's kind of deciding where that value sits and how you can promote the tool by allowing developers and others to use it in that way and still getting like that expertise or the higher level of value out of it by engaging and actually paying, right? So I get it.
Like, I think it's important to say that your experience is the bottom line, only one that matters, because all of these justifications, all of these excuses, and all this rationale doesn't matter. The fact that you're frustrated by it, right? And you're a pro, and there's no way that somebody who is not sufficiently motivated, who cares a lot, it comes back to that sort of how hard it is and how much you care, right? Who cares a lot, right? They will go through, and this is like security ergonomics as a whole, right? This is this notion. I have this talk titled Security Ergonomics, and it talks about how, people disavow. There's all these horrendous statistics about people pushing through certificates, like warnings and things like that. And it's like, hey, my motivation right now, if I'm browsing Facebook, I want to see baby pictures, and nothing you're going to do is going to get in my way, right? Like, just prompt whatever it is. Like, if I browse the website, I'm going to accept the cookies. Of course, I'm going to accept the cookies. I want to browse the website. That's what I want to do right now. And so, like, a lot of these things are just about that balance, right? So if you're willing as a business to sort of narrow yourself to just the people that care so much that would go through these hoops, then you can build a business. A lot of successful businesses built that way. But if you want to go to developers, if you want to go to the masses, if you want to go to people that want to be secure, but that's not most of their being, like, that's not to a level, then you have to lower the barrier.
Yeah. And I mean, from I wish that more would push that way, right? And I do see it from some of the newer, like tools like Snyk, right? Or even Brakeman, right, from Justin Collins, and some of those other static analysis tools like PumaScan, and those guys are so focused on kind of the developer side of things that they've made it really easy to go and pull down a license and try something out, as opposed to kind of that old staid, they've been around for 25 years and it's gone, it was purchased by AppScan and or purchased by IBM. And so I don't know. I think we see the industry shifting for sure, because we are talking about it. We're talking about the fact that the developers don't want to use those tools because of those facts, right? I know, CK Trickier, I know Ken that actually uses quite a few tools on his side, but from a GitHub perspective, you guys are very similar, right? Like you're not going out and purchasing a large. No. Okay.
No. Yeah. Similar.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And it's just, I think it'll happen. There's a bit of a do or die type element, right? You can choose your timeline, but in 20 years time, right? To make up a slightly further out horizon, I think some security tools like threat intelligence or, like some security tools would still be oriented at the individual, but this notion of security hygiene at scale, this notion of tools that need to be embedded, need to be intrinsic into the surrounding of the developer or someone where security isn't their primary job. It's a property of their job. I think all of those tools need to become, embedded, easy, self-serve, and all that jazz. Otherwise, they won't thrive, right? They just they'll die.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, let's see. We have been going for an hour. We want to be cognizant of your time, Guy, because we appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, I can go maybe a few more minutes, but
okay.
I've got probably 1,000 business-related questions I could ask you. So, this could go on forever, but we won't do that to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, as far as kind of wrapping things up, Ken already asked kind of what you see for the future, so we'll leave that one for now. If people want to interact with you or meet you face to face, where can they find you?
I guess we're kind of towards the end of the conference season, right? I feel like every week I was at some event. You're more likely to find me at a dev event than you are at a security event. My next one is reInvent in the AWS event. And yeah, I don't have an exact sort of structure, a plan for the week, but basically, the big kind of cloud events, container. I was just at KubeCon, so those are the events.
Okay.
Our team, you can find us, mostly at sort of AppSec events and at, kind of big dev and DevOps engagements. We try to be on a bunch of meetups as well. So if you check out, I think there's actually need to vet this. I think there was like a snick.io/events where folks from the team are at. Let me actually see if that's still the case. Yeah, here we go. Snick.io/. And we also, we bought DevSecCon. It was a whole bunch of things. We didn't talk about the security developer and DevSecCon. So as a company, we bought DevSecCon, and we continue to run it as a community conference, sort of as a multi, just of a platform to share and collaborate and bring indeed that culture shift and perspective into it. So the DevSecCon events is definitely a place to meet me and definitely a lot of our crew. And you can listen to some of my other ramblings, or really more my guests' content at the Security Developer podcast.
Yeah, and we appreciate that one as well. I mean, Ken and I we were on Security Developer. It was a few months ago. Did a session on secure code review, right? Same kind of thing, and it's a great resource as well. So I appreciate you guys putting that on. It takes all of us, right?
Yeah, and I think it's all about collaboration and sharing, and it's hard in security, but we got to try. That's the way it works.
Cool. Well, good. And Ken did post your Twitter handle there, so people can find you there.
Easily found on the web.
GuyPod, awesome. All right. Well, yeah. Again, Guy, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it, and thank you for your time and your explanations. And let us know if there's anything we can do from our side. But we definitely see you guys around, right? AppSec Day down in Australia. I think we saw the booth and talked to the guys for a second. But appreciate you and all that you're doing. Ken, do you have anything else for us today?
No, just thank you to Guy, and thank you to the listeners for also attending and watching.
Cool. Well, thanks
Cool.
a lot for having me on.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a nice day.
Thanks. Bye.